Hello, my name's Tom Brady, and welcome to Open a Bottle by the Oxford Wine Company, a short form version of the Oxford Wine and Spirit podcast. My guest today is Bill Shearer, UK brand ambassador to all things whiskey when it comes to the Remy Cointreau brand umbrella. Today, we're honing in on the topic of barley, in particular Scottish barley, and I'm delighted to say that in my hands is a bottle of the 2014 Bruichladdich Islay Barley. Bill, a very warm welcome to the podcast. Before we dive in, I was hoping you could tell our listeners a little bit more about your role with Remy Cointreau and what it is that you do on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, how you doing? Thanks for having me on. I guess trying to explain what I do on a day-to-day basis is not particularly easy sometimes. I mean, I tried to explain it to my dad, and I think he had no idea what I do. So on a day-to-day for me, I look after all whiskey at Remy Cointreau. So this is Bruichladdich, which to be fair is probably about 90% of my time. And then we have Westland, which is a whiskey based in Seattle, which is American single malt, and then Hot's Glass, which is a single malt based down in the Alps in France. So day to day for me is kind of getting pulled in all different directions. I'm in the marketing department, but then I assist the sales team on masterclasses, hosting guests, even hosting people at the distillery, and coming up with kind of brand advocacy things to kind of really drive the brand and prestige on trade, and just making sure that everyone on trade and consumers are aware of Bruichladdich. And kind of the way my brand manager kind of explained to me is almost like a lighthouse of education. Like if you need anything Bruichladdich, then they come to me in the business, which is great. And then if I don't know the answer, I speak to the distillery, which is easier. But yeah, I think that's a really short way of explaining my job. It's not sales, but then I work aligned with sales and kind of assist by, working with the sales team to making sure that their customers are satisfied and, their bartenders are trained, incentives are running up, and just all the education. So chatting whiskey and drinking whiskey about 7 days a week.
I think particularly for people who are maybe sort of a step away from the industry, brand ambassador is such an enviable job. It does sound like a lot of fun. The travel is obviously the toughest one, particularly if you're covering the length and breadth of the UK.
Yeah, I don't know how much I can see the LNER train anymore. Especially when it's the festival, like for Shearer, I've got to go up to Glasgow and then from there fly over. And the flight is 30 minutes. But if we end up having to take the ferry, the drive to Kenny Craig is 2.5 hours. And then the ferry is another 2.5 hours. And you're just, the travel kills you. But I mean, it's an excuse for me to do all my admin on the train anyway.
So we're here to talk about Bruichladdich. And I know the island of Islay will need no introduction to a lot of the folks at home, but let's do it anyway. Where in the world is Islay, and why is it so important to us whiskey fans?
I think when it comes to Scottish whiskey, Islay and Speyside are the two areas that people really home in on. Islay itself, with its rich history and the fact that the turf, the ground itself is 70% peat, everyone making whiskey on the island had a constant fuel for the malting process. And because it's such a distinctive peat kind of taste, and the style of Islay and the islands is just so predominant and synonymous with Islay itself. I mean, peated whiskey, you think peated whiskey, if you ask people to name 5 peated whiskey distilleries, they'll go straight to naming 5 that all come from Islay. It really is that connection. Through history as well, Islay's always been this sort of kind of barbaric, almost kind of islanders that no one really goes to, no one really contacts that much. It really was through the illicit whiskey days, even when the tax came in. It was 1644 when the first kind of whiskey tax came in. Like people up in the Highlands and Speyside were, quite easily watched, and I would say, not so much guarded, but they couldn't get away with as much as the island, the Elux as they're called, they could get away with. So, I mean, over the years and even more recently, Islay whiskey is a massive trend. We're sitting at 9 distilleries, working distilleries, and I think we have 2 or 3 more opening soon. Just constant amount of new distilleries opening on Islay, and it's one of those things that it's not just famous for single malts, but predominantly a lot of the distilleries, that whiskey is so distinctive in blends, so it's really used there to bulk up blends as well and can essentially create the backbone of a lot of the blended whiskey that you know now. And being unpeated at Bruichladdich was something that's always quite unique with Islay. And obviously we do Port Charlotte, which is peated, and then Octomore, which is, well, I mean, if you smoke Marlborough Reds, then that's probably Octomore's for you. And even with the history of the Irish monks going over to Islay, distilling there, and then illegally transferring the whiskey into the Highlands, it is quite a remarkable place that's filled with history.
So there's clearly a lot to talk about when it comes to Bruichladdich, the distillery. This is one of my favourite distilleries, and there are a lot of reasons for that. But if we had to sum up Bruichladdich in 3 key points, what do you think they would be?
For me, I would say transparency would be the first one. And we're fully transparent in what we do. Being a whiskey fan before I started working for Bruichladdich, transparency was something that really blew my mind. You know, this goes down to we tell you which barley field, which type, which cask, which age, not just the age and the cask, but like the season, the field, the farm, like everything. Even how we work in the building, how we work around, how we work with Remy, everything is really full transparent, which was quite a rarity in whiskey, and it still is now, but the tide's starting to change, which is great. Second for me would be a sense of community and family. We hire about 150 people on the island. This is not people that work for Remy Cointreau. These are people that work for Bruichladdich. And to have 150 people working for you on the island, you know, we're the highest private employer. The highest employer is the council, but if an island of 3,500 people, I don't think we're going to beat the council in employees, but we're the highest private employer at the moment. And then the third one, I would say, is terroir. It really is. For me, it was kind of the first ever Scottish whiskey that really looked into barley and the terroir and the sense of place. And not just talking about, you know, the sense of place of where it's aging and talking about the local spring water and, you know, the usual kind of whiskey stuff that we chat about. It was a sense of place in terms of the barley and talking about that terroir, which for me, I never thought about barley and terroir. But from our previous owners, which we'll talk about later on, it makes sense for them. If they come from the wine industry, why wouldn't you? So that would be the 3 key points I'd say about Bruichladdich.
So moving on to this bottle in my hands, which I think I'm going to have to open any minute now. This is the Islay Barley 20. And so we are talking about barley. I mean, am I right in saying this is part of a kind of series of barley-focused releases?
The barley expressions that we did, I think it was kind of for us to kind of show method to our madness, I guess. It's all good and well talking about barley and the importance. I mean, every stage of whiskey distillation and production is important. You know, the cask, the mash tun, fermentation, everything is really important. But for us, you know, as you know, we really focus on the barley. We have the beer barley. Beer barley is an ancient variety of barley, which we get from Orkney at the moment, which was actually the original barley for Ushkabaha, which is the original whiskey spirit. Beer barley being the ancient grain it was, the yield was quite small. So a lot of people kind of ditched it and started kind of growing commercial two-row barleys, I would say. And then the last one for us, organic barley, which actually means quite a lot for me personally, because it's from Midcool Farm in Inverness. So it's actually where I'm from. The farm was very close to where I grew up, which is quite nice. So it's kind of gone full circle for me joining the brand. So when I joined and I learned that the farm that we're getting our organic from was that Midcool Farm in Inverness, I was like, it's nice, very close to me. But yeah, the Islay Barley that you've opened up here, I would say is probably the most special out of the 3. This really is kind of a sense of place for us.
Can you tell us a little bit more about the raw material, the barley that's in the bottle here?
Yeah, so our Islay Barley came around, I'd say the first distillation we did was around 2004. So we reopened in 2001, and that's when we started to focus on Scottish barley as our main focus. Now, we were using mainland barley, but in 2004, we worked with Remy Cointreau up at Cointreau Farm, basically asking him to grow barley on Islay. Bear in mind, barley hasn't been grown on Islay since World War II, just after. So the idea for him wasn't just a case of it hasn't been done for so long. It was actually, I don't know anyone that has been growing barley on Islay, so I don't really know exactly how to do this. And it's not just the terroir is quite tough, you know, with, you know, facing the North Atlantic, where the island is on the west coast, we get absolutely battered by that North Atlantic wind and rain. We always say it rains every day of the year in Islay, and if it doesn't rain, then it rains again. So it's a really tough place, but we also have 36,000 geese. So we're kind of battling them as well, and the deer. So it's a battle of wills, I would say. But Raymond Stewart, he took up the mission. He grew the barley in 2004, gave it to us. We of course made whiskey out of it. We gave it to every other farmer on the island. And in 2004, it was just one farm. Now it was sitting about 21, 22 farms on Islay growing barley. And they don't grow barley just for us, they grow for everyone. For us, this is more of a case to kind of diversify the incomes from farmers. You know, I mean, being from Scotland myself, and if anyone is from Scotland, you know, we are the land of sheep. basically. And sheep is it's a safe farm. You're going to get a constant supply of money. It's not too much effort, but whereas with barley, it's inconsistent. You can't guarantee it, and especially on Islay. But now our total production, our total barley intake for us across all three of our whiskey brands is about 51-52% Islay barley. So this is even our Bruichladdich 18 as Islay barley. We have Octomores of Islay barley. Port Charlotte, we have a Port Charlotte release, just Islay barley focused. And then with Bruichladdich as well, even with our classic laddie, we have a little batch code at the back where we'll tell you, if you put it into our website, we'll tell you everything that's in it. And then for the Islay barley that you're drinking there, this is where we hyper focused on what that kind of terroir tastes like. And when it comes to the cask expression of the Islay barleys, we feel personally that Bruichladdich always been our foundations, our bourbon cask finishes. That's what we are. If you ever had the chance to try the old Bruichladdich from the 70s and the 80s, they're very bourbon finish focused. And obviously unpeated, anything Bruichladdich would be unpeated, but we're sitting here about 80% first fill bourbon casks. We have 5% sherry butts, and the last 15% is a combination of different French wines. For us, this kind of looks like it's more like a kind of salt and pepper, I guess. You're a bit seasoning at the finish, but the bulk of this is first fill bourbon, and this allows the spirit nowhere to hide, if that makes sense. You can make whiskey, put it in a sherry cask, and it'll come out tasting delicious because it's sherry, it's nice and sweet and delicious. But if you put it into a bourbon cask, you're not getting so much interaction with the cask and flavour from the cask. The spirit has to be good. The new make has to be good. And it really highlights the taste of that barley that we're having. We're sitting there, this one here is 11 farms for the 2014. 2013 harvest, distilled in 2014, aged 9 years old, and it's 11 farms. And all the barley is about less than 11 miles from around the distillery. So it really, obviously a lot of the stuff that we do, well, everything that we do in terms of maturation is on the island. So I would love to say that the North Atlantic wind comes onto the island and looks straight for Bruichladdich warehouses and goes straight into the cask and makes it all salty. There's an element of the cask breathing in that air, but for me, it's the terroir on the barley. I mean, if you're growing barley in 70% peat, surely that peat's having an effect on the barley itself and the actual flavour of the barley. So this really gets this really kind of salty, almost malty finish.
The thing that gets me with this is there's the savoury element to it. I think maybe it's because I've had a lot of sherried whiskies recently, but I always find with Bruichladdich, there is that case of one, you're tasting the raw material, so you can taste the grain coming through. There's a distinct cereal character. Two, I think you're absolutely right when you're talking about those bourbon casks and having nowhere to hide. It is, I think bourbon, it works so well with whiskey because it does impart that flavor, but it also doesn't take over. And it does give a real uniqueness when it comes to sort of leading back to the distillery and saying, okay, this is a house style of distillery X, is distillery Y, which is fantastic. So I'm totally getting that on the nose, and that savouriness is something that I really love. And there's a little bit of sweetness in there, a little bit of salinity just to give it extra dimension. But no, it's got that Bruichladdich DNA running right through it. Yeah. I wanted to just go back and touch base on the concept of local barley and even the wider concept of Scottish barley, because it's such a hot button topic right now. I think nobody ever really talked about the raw material and the grain and where it came from. I mean, traditionally going back to distillery tours, everyone would talk about the water, but nobody would talk about the barley. And it's been great to see Bruichladdich kind of raise this as a topic of discussion and really kind of shout about it. What is the situation really across the wider Scotch whisky industry when it comes to growing the barley? Where's it all coming from?
Yeah, I think this is a question. The question that you asked just there is the question that Mark Rayner and Simon Coughlin asked themselves when they purchased the distillery in 2001. To give a little backing into this, Simon Coughlin and Mark Rayner they grew up together as friends, and they made a lot of their kind of like their career in wine, so importing fine wine. So if you're really into wine at that level as well, it is massively about the terroir. And working for Remy Cointreau, the amount of times I hear terroir is just imprinted every week. And when they bought Bruichladdich and obviously managed to convince Jim McEwen to come over from Beaumont, they sat there and they thought, why does no one talk about terroir? Why are you not talking about your raw material? It comes from barley. You seem to just, the industry as a whole will buy barley from wherever it's the cheapest. They'll buy it in, they'll malt it, and then they'll do everything they can to it, such as aging, distillation, everything else. But the barley was seen as, it doesn't really matter. Just buy barley and then use it. This is not me saying that's wrong. I'm not saying that every Scottish distillery should use Scottish barley, because I'm going to be honest with you, we're seeing 160 odd distilleries. I don't think there's enough space in Scotland to grow barley for one run of probably the Macallan. So, the volumes are too high, and there's nothing wrong with buying barley from different parts of the world. Nothing wrong with that at all. I think for us and for Simon Coffin and Mark Rayner, it felt a bit like a conversation they wanted to talk about. I feel more so than ever, especially with these Islay farms, there's been about 20, 21 around Islay now growing barley. Like I said, who are not contracted to grow for us. They can grow for wherever they like. I know Kilhoman did the Islay release as well. And I'm sure there's a few other distilleries in Islay that are now buying Islay barley. And I think, that a lot of these young distilleries opening up now, especially, up in Isle of Harris using Scottish barley, Nicknean as well, organic, which is unbelievable juice. It really does highlight the idea of commercial sense of different flavours from different barleys, and not just talking about cask all the time. I'd be interested to see where it goes. I mean, obviously we have the Scottish Whisky Association, so they kind of decide on what we say and what we can't say. We've had a few battles with them in the past, but I'd be interested to see if there's going to be even more Speyside whiskies, or even up in the islands as well, who are going to stop really super focusing on barley that grows around them. I mean, Springbank did their local barley, the local barley 13-year-old, I think it was. And that was incredible, like everything from Springbank. But that kind of highlighting that locally grown barley and working with local farms, giving that sense of place, is really starting to come up more. I'd be interested to see what happens, to be honest. But it's more about being transparent to your guests. If you can, I always kind of say this, but if you can grab a tin of beans and look on the back and see exactly what's in it, why can't you do that for a bottle of whiskey? And that's how we run with our transparency. And I believe it's fair for consumers.
I would agree wholeheartedly. I mean, particularly as someone who does a lot of presentations and does a lot of whiskey tastings and hosts these things, where my job is to stand up in front of a group of people and talk at length about these distilleries and these places and these whiskies and how they're made and what they do. It's an absolute nightmare when you're going to be talking about a product and you go online and you just find the same generic information about a river source and about a history and about they had a bad time in the 80s like everyone else. And there we go. For me, it's a wonderful thing to be able to actually go onto a website and just get this list of facts. And I can draw upon that. Having had a bit of an education in whiskey, I can say, okay, well, they're using this cask makeup. From this cask makeup, these are the things that I can glean from it. And I can use that information to then explain the processes and how things work to the people that I'm presenting to, which in turn gives them a better experience at the presentation, and it gives them a better drinking experience as well.
Yeah,
so
definitely.
It's something that I'm a huge fan of, and long may it last. I've just had a little go of this. It's pretty tasty.
Well, I mean, I was actually going to say to you, we bottle things at 50% ABV, so it does have a bit of a punch to it. But for us, we're flavour focused. I mean, we Adam Hannett and Jim McEwen. Adam Hannett's now a master distiller since Jim McEwen retired around 2014-15. We always bleed flavour first. So at 50%, you can always add in more, i.e. water. You can never take less out. So if you feel, for me personally, it's even with our Port Charlotte 10, I love Port Charlotte 10 with a bit of water, but sometimes I have it 50% and I'm like, yeah, I'm in the mood for that. But it really gives you that option too. I think it surprises people. A lot of the tastings I do, much like yourself, when I tell people this is the drams they've had today are all 50% minimum, they're like, wait, that's really strong. And it doesn't really taste like that. And I think for us, that's only accreditation to the spirit that we're producing and the cask that we're using and the maturation and everything, small details. I'd be interested to see, though, how things in the industry turn, because it seems to be way more progressive than, God, even if you say 20, 15 years ago. It just seems a lot more progressive in the whiskey industry, which is great. And it's transparency, which is important.
I think the biggest thing that the whiskey industry needs to do is, instead of just writing finished in a wine cask or finished in a sherry cask, they need to actually start at the very least, say whether it's a red wine or a white wine, say
Yeah.
whether which region it came from, and if it's a sherry, there's a big difference between Oloroso and PX and Fino, etc., etc. So, and people know about these things now. So,
exactly.
just saying sherry ain't going to cut it anymore,
Do you know, when you said that about people knowing about this stuff now, that's what I was thinking the other day about the whole mystery of whiskey and about how the whiskey comes in and it goes into the mysterious place in the mysterious distillery and you don't know what happens, but it comes out amazing, almost like Willy Wonka. But like, people don't want that. People want the truth. They want to know what's happening, and these distilleries aren't doing anything wrong. There's not a single bad Scottish whiskey I can ever think of, and they're not doing anything illegal for sure. They're not doing anything wrong. It's full transparency. And you're talking about sherry casks, and recently, a lot of information been released about treated with sherry, that a lot of these casks have never seen sherry at all. We need to have an open conversation about it, I would say. And people are interested. Talking about a history of a distillery, talking about the water, and not telling people anything else, I don't really cuts it anymore. People want to know more, and good on them. The more questions, the better, I would say.
And then going back to what's in this glass, I mean, you're absolutely right about that texture. I would not have been able to guess that was a 50% whiskey. It really got the pleasant tingle on the palate there. You get a little bit of heat, but you kind of want that because it's a spirit at the end of the day.
Yeah.
I can feel it in my jowls just here as well. And it's that lovely, I think it has a little bit more sweetness. The nose is more savory and there's definitely more sweetness on the palate. There's a lovely kind of icing sugar thing coming through, a little bit of citrus as well, but that cereal character is there and it's running all the way through, and it's the last thing that sits there on the finish as well. So that's something that I think is really exciting, and I think that is certainly part of the DNA of Bruichladdich as a distillery as well. That's something that I get with pretty much everything that has Bruichladdich on the label. Is that a fair assumption?
Yeah, I would say that. Like, we were actually just released our 18-year-olds in January, February time. I just remembered we released our 18 and our 30-year-old, and I spent 2 months essentially drinking that every day for work events. So that was like 2 months of my life that I was just like, I all squeezed into 1 week. And when we were chatting about the 18-year-old, we chatted about that same DNA that goes through everything. And the 30-year-old that we released is the old stock. Like, if you do your maths, anything older than 2001 is the stuff that we acquired when we bought the distillery. We had 6,500 casks that we bought. When you try those, like, yes, they're different, but it's that DNA of those bourbon finishes that stay there. And this even goes into our distillation process, our stills, the mash tuns that we have. Our original mash tun is 1881. It's the same mash tun we've had since we opened. That hasn't changed. It's an open tub metal mash tun. I think we are, if I'm correct in saying, we're one of 6 distilleries in Scotland to have an open tub mash tun. And it's the same one from 1881. There's actually a cute little story. But Bunnahabhain, they opened up in 1881 as well. So we both ordered our mash tuns at the same time. Theirs arrived onto the island first. They weren't ready to receive theirs, so we took theirs and they took ours. So we actually have Bunnahabhain's original mash tun that we've just acquired when we first opened. And everything you've had from Bruichladdich has been through that mash tun. Obviously not Botanist gin, but every single whiskey you've had has been through that mash tun. Well, what's really smart about our distillery is that we're a purpose-built distillery. A lot of whiskey distilleries were making whiskey during the illicit whiskey days, and then essentially got their license when they stopped paying tax and stuff like that. And they were essentially old barns or warehouses, and they just kind of converted into a distillery, kind of developed into a distillery. For us, we were purpose-built. We were created by the Harvey brothers. There's 3 brothers. They came onto the island. They had 2 distilleries in the lowlands, and they decided with Islay, this is a good opportunity because it was called Glasgow Steamboat, I think it was. There's a type of boat that was developed and created, and it basically allowed connection to the Isles a lot quicker than before. So they're like, this is a good time now that we could go out there, open up a distillery. We have 3 distilleries, and we can make our own blended whiskey, because blended whiskey, of course, for hundreds of years essentially was the pinnacle of whiskey. Single malts were for the peasants around the distilleries, but blendeds was for the kings, which is completely different now when you look at the industry. But they opened up Bruichladdich. What we did is they came onto the island and they essentially picked the best spot for a distillery. So we're right on the shore where the old pier used to be for easy transport in and out. If you look at our distillery, it's built as a rectangle with a big courtyard in the middle. This courtyard in the middle allowed easy access in and out. We're actually built on a hill. So when you come into our distillery, you look left and you'll see that we're built on a hill. The top of the hill is our mash tun, which will then go into our washbacks, and then from our washbacks into our stills, and then around the stills used to be where they kept the casks. So basically, gravity was taking the liquid from every single process of distillation of production all the way through to the end. Obviously, we don't need that now. We have the machinery to be able to do that, but it's how the still is. We haven't changed it at all. Our mash tun is right at the top, and then right beside it goes into our 6 Oregon pine washbacks, and it goes into our stills. We've got 2 mash stills at the moment and 2 spirit stills, all sitting at 12,000 litres. And one of our stills actually has the same base since 1881. So you can actually see where the coal fire is actually burnt around it, which is quite smart. We're using steam now. We're not using coal fire anymore. And from there, it really does create this unique backbone to Bruichladdich. And for us, that really does come from our stills. Our stills were created by the Harvey brothers, in fact. They were engineers. So what they did is they created this whiskey still with a very long, extra long linarm, which essentially created a very kind of slow distillation process. The idea was they wanted to make a whiskey that was very delicate and light and unpeated from Islay. You know, knowing Islay being the very kind of, I would say, I don't want to say rough, but very ballsy peated whiskey. They wanted to make something that was complete opposite and very kind of light and delicate. So having these big long linarms allows us to create that very distinctive, unique Bruichladdich taste, which in fact is what got Mark Rayner into whiskey before. It's only really done creditation to what we are and what a backbone is. And from there, obviously, bourbon cask, lead, finished. Yeah, it's been quite a journey. And if you go into our distillery, you'll see how it's still a very Victorian distillery. We have our same mill is a Bobby mill from 1913, the exact same one. Everything it's done by weight as well. Every kind of 40 kilograms, it just drops down and then picks up the next bit and kind of grinds it down. It's very, very interesting. You go see it, and it's a really old distillery, but it's also producing very new and unique whiskies at the same time.
I love the idea of building on a hill. It's kind of like a precursor to the Port of Leaf distillery that's just started making liquid. So that's brilliant. Final thoughts on this whiskey? Anything else that you want to say about it?
I would say it's kind of a true taste of an unpeated Islay, I would say. I mean, I would actually recommend everyone to buy the Bruichladdich Islay Barley and also buy the Port Charlotte Islay. And then you can get to see the peated and the unpeated version side by side. Of course, they taste differently, but it's not just the lack of peat or the introduction of peat. It's the whole backbone is different. The whole texture, everything is completely different. But they've been through the same mash tun, the same stills, the same washbacks. We're using 2 different strains of yeast at the moment, a fast-acting yeast and then a slow-acting yeast that comes in after about 50 hours. We have about 72 hours full maturation. It depends. If we do it on the weekend, there's a little bit more because, you know, we're obviously a bit more relaxed on the weekend. But yeah, and you can really see the contrast of these 2 whiskies and their flavours and their profiles. And in full transparency as well, the peat that we use for our Port Charlotte and our Octomore is actually coming from around Caithness and around the Caledonian Forest. Because we do a malting Inverness, that we basically obviously get peat from around the area. So it's a whole different style. Instead of that medicinal iodine that you get from Islay peat, this is a bit more of a kind of a charcoal, leather, kind of an oak smoke, you know, basically flora and fauna, you know, a whole different type of terroir. If you ever get the chance to go to Inverness, when you're going across the Keswick Bridge to go into the Black Isle, before you go over the bridge, if you turn right, you see a really bad football club called Inverness Caledonian Thistle. And then on the left-hand side, you have Baird's malting facility, and that's where we do our malting. So for me, being from Inverness, it's a big sense of place for me. It's nice to see the distillery I'm working for is connected to my hometown. But yeah, I'd recommend the Baird barley as well if you get the chance. It's an ancient grain, 6-row barley. Used to grow in Islay until people started growing commercial, sort of 2-row conventional barleys just for a better yield. Baird barley is really a true testament to what whiskey tasted like back in the time where Baird barley was grown all over Scotland, and it was the only barley type grown for whiskey. And then if you want something a bit more funky and a bit more unusual, I recommend the organic. And then it's hard. Like, I find myself already doing it, but Bruichladdich is a bit of a rabbit hole when I chat about it. There's know yourself. There's so much to talk about. And then obviously you go into the Octomores, and then that's a whole different kettle of fish. But yeah, I think before I talk too much about all the different barley types, I'll see if you have any questions as well, Tom.
I mean, I think you've summed it up really, really well. I mean, it's something. I think it's a case of if you taste some of it and it sort of piques your interest, I would definitely recommend anyone to go out and buy a bottle of the Classic Laddie. It's such an approachable, really great kind of introduction to the distillery. I would definitely suggest people that go out and grab a bottle of that. But we are quickly running out of time, but I do think there is a little bit of time left to do some shameless shout outs. So Bill, where can we follow you? Where can we follow Bruichladdich on social media?
Yeah, so my social media handle is is Billy Vanilli 13.
Yes.
So it's Billy_Vanilli 13. And yeah, you'll find me at Bjorn Bruichladdich all over my Instagram account. And if you want to follow all the new updates from Bruichladdich, I would honestly say the Bruichladdich Instagram account. It's run by our staff employee Graham. He works up in Glasgow, works with Bruichladdich directly, and honestly, sometimes they post stuff and I'm like, oh yeah, I forgot about that. Yeah, that's perfect. Thank you. Like, they're hands-on at the distillery. It's not a Remy Cointreau account. It's a Bruichladdich account. And that's the best way to keep up to date what's going on. Yeah, apart from that, I'd recommend, even, I know it sounds ridiculous to say, but you said about Classic Laddie. If you go onto our website, if you have a bottle of Classic Laddie, put the little batch code at the bottom, put it into the website, and you get to see where everything comes from for that Classic Laddie that you're drinking. It's really transparent on the website, to be honest with you. We'll tell you so much information to the point that you're probably going to have to do a midnight read and have a wee sleep afterwards, but all the information possible.
Well, you can do it with a glass of whiskey at least. So that's
exactly.
Bill, thank you so much for your time and your thoughts and your insights. That was really, really brilliant. And look forward to seeing you soon.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you for having me. And anything else you need, just give me a shout. Thank you.
Cheers, Bill.
Cheers, mate. Thank you, Vlad.